Exponential growth is on the minds of Palantir investors today. So we'll cover some of what I think are the best, but also the worst of the requested questions for the upcoming Q2 2024 earnings. And keep an eye out for my upcoming video as well on the earnings preview, where we'll cover what happened last quarter and what I'll be looking out for this next one in order to be a good or bad earnings cycle. So it's been about a week and a half since earnings questions opened up, and we've got the 10 most voted questions already as of July 25th for this recording. So let's just get started where I'll give my raw thoughts on each of these questions, but comment down below if you voted or posted any of these questions. I'm curious to see on your thoughts on each of these. Now, coming in at number 10 with 352 votes, what is Palantir doing in a way to be different from its AI competitors? Markets becoming slowly saturated with all types of AI companies. Now, what I like about this question is that it's asking for a specific answer while also with a self-reflection portion where we hopefully can get a perspective from how they view themselves in the marketplace. And they did keep it pretty broad regarding market saturation of all types of AI companies. Now, I'm also curious to know if they'll dive deeper on how they see themselves publicly besides saying we're ahead of competitors. But what I'd expect if they chose to answer this question is talk about AIP bootcamps, no doubt, because of that hands-on approach that they've taken to educate the market, and not just throw an AI solution or LLM for those trying to figure it out and how to implement it themselves, as well as the other big differentiators, their experience in working with the most complicated and big customers like the US government, but also other commercial entities like BP, for example, and Cleveland Clinic and others. And combined with the marketplace that they're making available to their customers in AIP now, as well as their dev builder site. So these would be not surprising to hear from them since these are the most recent initiatives to do just that and differentiate themselves from the AI competition. And Palantir doesn't necessarily label themselves like AI in the way that most people think, like large language models, but actually being able to deliver operationalization of AI in combination with your organization's human touch as the experts in your field. Then coming in at number 9, what strategies does Palantir employ to attract and retain top talent in a highly competitive tech industry? Now, I think this is actually a decent question too, and most likely this person and other investors are more curious about their thoughts on stock-based compensation. So it's no secret that Palantir attracts top talent because first, there is something at stake when it comes to compensation for these employees with that stock-based compensation when they join. And if we remember from last earnings, the incentive to reach a $50 share price is built in, so it's a little detail caught by retail investors last quarter. But I honestly don't think it's something they'd want to tout on an earnings call though. But also besides the monetary end of things, they always talk about the mission-oriented side of Palantir and their focus. And yes, it may rub some folks the wrong or right way, but that really comes down to your values and perspective. But more importantly is the environment to get access to work on the most interesting problems in the world. If you think about those from the top of their game, especially if they've already achieved that financial aspect, another huge motivator for people is to take on a challenge. And there's no short of opportunities to do those at Palantir, considering first of all, the industries that they're in is widespread, but also the types of clientele dealing with huge problems on their own. So I'd be surprised though if they mentioned anything else on this subject. Now at number 8, is Palantir more focused on growth in the government section or the civilian market in the future? Now, I don't think this is a really well-phrased question here because if they give an answer about their focus on one, it might sound like they're slacking at another. And more likely they would answer this with saying, well, there's more potential here or activity or tailwinds, which I would say is commercial though. And they've been focusing on that because Palantir is really expanding their commercial customer numbers, especially in the United States, which has been the long-running narrative for the past several quarters. And it's not to say that they're not focused on their government business, but they've said time and time again, especially in Europe, the headwinds, but also the lumpiness of the US government too in that business naturally. So we'll see if they even address this. Then there's number 7. Does Palantir have any immediate or near future plans to acquire additional companies or competitors? Now, it's another question that I'm very curious personally about, but don't expect them to see an answer about this, at least in specifics. Now, it's kind of a mixed bag because when you're trying to buy a company, especially when you have a big cash pile like them, you're now putting that money to compete against the risk-free rate of return of treasuries. So if it ends up being an investment that's not worth it, it'll bite management later on. But obviously, if it outperforms, then that's great. It's just that the risk-free rate of return to overcome compared to, say, pandemic times with rock bottom interest rates then would have been so much easier. But also, I'm not sure if Palantir would want to show their cards just yet if they were even thinking about this. I'd say if they were to address this question, they'd keep it generic where they'd say we're always looking out for these opportunities and for those that would truly synergize with Palantir that we could not build better ourselves. But considering their innovative nature as well, and we've seen this in the past, the headache to acquire other companies or competitors could just end up not being worth the trouble. Then with number 6, being how does Palantir plan on integrating AI into their business model? Now, this is kind of a generic question too, in my opinion. Palantir has already showcased earlier, and I said this in the video, using Palantir themselves. And that was an awesome little interview too with the CIO, because what would a company do and who says they got the best AI operationalizing software, but not use it themselves, which would be kind of sus. Now, integrating it into their business model might be more of a question on how they can acquire customers, specifically on that side. So if they have something to say about, if they would, but I don't think this would be a question on it's that they'd already be answered by them naturally already talking about their business and what they're doing. Now, number 5, what is the company's goal by 2030? Now, I don't like this question at all, honestly. It's too generic. It can mean anything from financially to operationally to mission wise or just anything. Answers in specifics is not worth the trouble here, especially with that long time frame. But do still like the idea of what Palantir's long-term goals are, and if they're willing to give that out and show it on a roadmap that we don't know about. And I'd say giving specifics though 6 years out though probably won't make sense for them, and they won't address this. Now with number 4, how do you plan to keep the growth of your company going? This I do not like either. It's so open-ended, and obviously Palantir is already trying to drive growth. This will already be naturally answered when talking about their business today and the immediate things that they're doing, which probably is continue to execute and bring value to their customers. And maybe some of the extra things that I've talked about before is that their attempts to bring in more customers as well as developers into their software ecosystem. Now, if this is how they're going to keep growth going or to increase it, maybe that's a different kind of question here. But like I said, it's very, very, very open-ended, so we don't know exactly what they're asking. Then top 3 is what is Palantir's growth look like in the next 5 years? Now, this is already similar to that 2030 questions where if they were to talk about this, it'd be generic. Now, I know they're asking specifically what does the growth look like? So it looks like they want to get a specific answer. And I know Carp did say that 30% growth rate a while back and stopped talking about it. So I don't think they're going to give out any numbers like that if they learned their lesson. But we'll talk about what they're doing today to drive growth as well and just cover it naturally with what they talk about on earnings already. Then the second most voted question here, does Palantir plan on paying shareholders dividends? The worst question, in my opinion, out of this top 10 list. I don't care if you're a new investor or not. It just doesn't make sense to ask this right now, especially for the type of company and the way you'd invest in this company. I'd rather have you ask about share buybacks, even though I'm not a fan of that either, especially at the current price action we see today. Now, if you truly believe their cash is worth giving to shareholders, that is a taxable income, rather than investing in themselves or even just sitting on treasuries, at least for the flexibility of future investments into themselves, then this isn't really the company for you to own shares in, not financial advice. And that's fine because we're all at different points in our lives, risk profiles, and goals. But there are other companies that are more appropriate for that question. Now, once they start distributing dividends, the narrative and multiples would completely change for Palantir in the stock and would reflect in the valuation that the market gives them, or at least the narrative around it. Considering they're saying we don't know what to do with this cash, I don't know, but still, it makes me shake my head seeing this as the second top most voted question. But maybe at this point, it's a silly tradition and joke, and everyone's voting for this ironically. But I don't know, it just seems kind of silly that it gets this much attention. And then the top number 1 most voted question, when can we expect exponential growth? Now, this too, I do not like. Exponential growth in what? Customer counts, revenue, which I think they're already referring to, or is it their profitability or something else? This isn't a question management would answer specifically and not behold themselves to a check mark or a point that they have to get to, and not even generally because who is defining exponential growth and for what metrics? But I think what this question captures, though, which is important, is the sentiment of investors and where we are today. They're wanting to see the growth, or at least have an expectation of when can we expect some hints of that or some acceleration of that, because that's what's keeping the valuation and price of Palantir up today, in my opinion. Will you grow into this or exceed the valuation that we're pricing you at today? And is it worth it for us to hold on to you as a company or even to buy more shares? And maybe we'll get clues throughout earnings, but answering this specifically of, oh, this is when exponential growth will start is probably not going to happen. And I wouldn't expect management or want them to do that. But what are your thoughts below? That's the final question, and I'll see you in the next video.